Hello everyone, this is Samuel Chang here again for Joiner Reading. We're going to be going over section 1.2, close reading today, and today we're going to be going over some close reading guidelines, as well as going over some literary elements that you might or might not have seen before. And we're going to go through some ways you can build prior knowledge before, before mainly you read the essay. And we're going to be using the same short story here as we did in section 1.1. We're going to be using Through the Tunnel by Doris Lessing. So you all should already be familiar with the short story, so we can kind of build off of the annotations we've already done. So I do recommend you go back and watch section 1.1 if you have not already, because that will go that will cover the surface level, so we can dig a bit deeper today. Okay, so let me go ahead and let you see what I have here. Okay, so close reading guidelines. Close reading guidelines are a way, or a strategy, it says here, that can help you figure out a difficult word or understand a challenging piece of text. So we have two sections here. The first section, of course, is difficult words, and the second section is difficult sentences, paragraphs, or sections. So I will give you principles first, and then I'll go over a few examples of difficult words and difficult sentences, paragraphs, or sections for you to have, kind of an example of what places in the text you'll have to go through these kind of guidelines. So remember, in section 1.1, I underlined difficult words in yellow during annotations, right? So for most of those difficult words, while you're reading, you should have to go through these guidelines. So let's get started. So what I recommend is that you first, let me scoot this up so you can see it. You read the passage once. And during that reading, like I said in section 1.1, you underline for certain elements. Let me get my elements here so you can see. So remember in section 1.1 I said, for the first time through, you underline words and vocabulary, character traits, symbolism, and color imagery, right? Because those are the obvious things that you should you should look up before you, or think about before you read it the second time. But the second time, you have evidence that leads to a theme and key plot points, because you'll know the whole plot and all the evidence the second time, so that you can underline these things. Now, the first time through, of course, you'll be underlining words and vocabulary. So what I recommend is read the short story or the passage once, then follow these guidelines over the things that are underlined in yellow, right? Or the things you've underlined, the vocabulary that you've underlined. So follow these guidelines and then read again, right? Read again and underline for the second wave of things, because you'll understand the passage more the second time you read it through. If you've already read it through once, underline what you don't know and looked it up, right? So the first time you read through, you underline the difficult words, or you kind of, circle or, kind of outline the challenging pieces of text. And then after that, you kind of think about what it is in context. And then when you read it the second time, you get an easier time of figuring out, plot elements and evidence that leads to a theme. So when you're reading a text, assume that every word and phrase carries meaning. Because in, of course, English and reading class, you'll be given passages that are written very well, right? Those passages are specifically supposed to teach you what a good short story, or teach you or let you know what a good piece of writing is, because you all are learning. So, and these are designed to be a bit easier to write an essay about, because there's lots of deep meaning in everything. So you assume that every word and phrase carries meaning. If you're unsure of what something means, pause and do a close reading. And down here we'll talk about what a close reading is, right? So a close reading is not just an outlined process. A close reading can be many things. A close reading can be you stopping and thinking about it, or a close reading can be following any one or more of these principles, right, that I have outlined here. So let's go ahead and get started of going through these principles. So first, look carefully at the word, right? If you have a word you don't know, let's use a first example to kind of get used to what we're doing here. So you see in Through the Tunnel, I've outlined two things in black right here, contrition and chivalry, right? We went through what these words meant in section 1.1, but if you don't have a dictionary, or as I'm going to suggest in a little while, if you don't want to use a dictionary, because a dictionary gives you, the denotation or the hard meaning of the word. What you want to know is what the author means when they use the word in this specific context. So, contrition and chivalry. So unfailing impulse of contrition, a sort of chivalry. So what it says here is you look carefully at the word. Are there any prefixes, suffixes, or roots you recognize? Well, let's give you, let's do a few examples of words that have prefixes, suffixes, and roots. So as you all know from, prior English classes or language arts classes, prefixes, roots, and suffixes all happen in one word, right? You have the prefix that happens before the root, and that happens before the suffix. So an example of that is probably a word you all know, or not probably, of course you all know, uncomfortable, right? So you have a prefix un, means not, right? And then you have a root of comfort, and then you have a suffix of able. So you can, with these prefix, root, suffix, meanings, you can say, well, it means somebody is not able to be comforted, right? Pretty easy. Now, what if I give you a word that you might not know? Digestible. So, we have a suffix here. We have a root here, right? We don't have a prefix, but let's go ahead and, take this word apart. Now, you might think digest means, you eat food and then you digest it, right? But that's not exactly what digestible means, right? Because digest sometimes means, like you've heard of the Reader's Digest, I'm sure. Sometimes it means stuff that you can think about, stuff that you can mentally digest, stuff that you can take apart and think about. So when we see the word digest, we can say, well, this word is probably going to mean able to be digested, right? And since we think about what digest means, and most of us should probably know what digest means, we kind of know what this big word means, right? And what if I say undigestible? Well, you mean it means not able to be digested, right? So, first of all, you look for prefixes, suffixes, and roots. And the two words I just said, contrition and chivalry, don't really have any prefixes, root, or suffixes, right? So let's move on to the next principle. Reread the sentences before and after the one containing the difficult word. Do they contain any clues to what the word means? So I'm sure Miss Joyner and other teachers have talked to you all about context clues, right? Context clues are very important. Now, why are context clues important? Well, context clues let you know not only the meaning of the word, but what the author wants you to glean from that word, what the author wants the word to mean in that context. Because, there are a lot of words that mean certain things, but of course you don't necessarily want these words to mean the same thing when you use them in different places, right? So of course, you need to look at this stuff around it, either the sentences or the words immediately surrounding that one word to find what they mean in the context of the passage. And then the next one is there a glossary you can consult? Are there any text features, charts, or illustrations that provide clues to the word? This won't be as important. This won't be as important in literary text because you aren't reading an encyclopedia, obviously. So in literary texts, like short story and novels, you won't necessarily have glossaries or, charts or illustrations. But when you're reading, of course, a nonfiction text, you might have those. So keep that in mind, but know that won't be necessarily as important in texts like this. So, have you seen or heard the word or phrase? Now that's an interesting question right there. So, in what situation? Can you recall what the word or phrase meant in the specific situation? Let me turn this speaker off so you can't hear the dinging anymore. Sorry. So in that word or phrase, in what situation have you heard that word or phrase before? Now, let's kind of think about, of course, this is better than looking it up because when you have experience using a word, you kind of know the connotation, not just its dictionary meaning, right? You know what what it feels like to read that word, right? So that's good. And can you recall what the word or phrase meant in the specific situation? Now, don't look up the word. That's a good principle to keep in mind. Don't look up the word until you've tried everything above, right? If you still cannot figure out what that difficult word means, then of course you can look it up in the dictionary. But be very careful when you're looking words up in the dictionary, because the dictionary, the dictionary definition of a word is not necessarily going to give you what the author means, as I've said. So let's look at, using these 4 principles, let's look at this sentence that I had right here. "Oh no," he said quickly, smiling at her out of that unfailing impulse of contrition, a sort of chivalry. So let's, in the context of 2 and 3, or in the context of both paragraphs 2 and 3, we need to figure out what the word contrition means. So they have a routine, right? They have a routine of swimming, sunbathing, and his mother said, "Are you tired of the usual beach?" And we can see from paragraph 1, if we read it closely, that his mother cares about him a lot, right? And he loves his mother a lot as well. And we've seen the word contrition up here already. Then he loves his mother a lot. So what is it that contrition means in this context? Well, his mother's asking him, would you like to go somewhere else? And we kind of infer that he does want to go somewhere else, right? He wants to go to that wild bay. But he says, oh no. What's the reason that he might say, oh no? Well, he might feel guilty for leaving his mother. He might feel scared. What are other reasons? Well, you can think about many reasons, but what's the most likely reason? Because he loves his mother, he wants to go to the bay, but I think the most likely reason is to feel guilty. So we can kind of infer, even though that's not the exact dictionary definition, we can kind of infer that the word contrition is going to mean, is of course going to mean feeling a little bit guilty, right? And while feeling guilty about something is something that usually a boy doesn't feel when he wants to go to a wild bay and play, right? He usually doesn't feel guilty, right? He usually, just pleads for his mother. But then, using that, what I just said, we can figure out what chivalry means. So the only type of boy that would feel necessarily contrition over going to play where he wants to be is one that's maybe chivalrous, right? And we don't necessarily know what chivalrous is, but we can kind of infer that it means that he takes care of his mother. He loves his mother. And, chivalry is, if you look it up in the dictionary or in a thesaurus, it's often related to, a knight in the past helping, a princess, or a knight helping, a normal citizen, right? A knight being chivalrous is them showing them really wanting to help others. So obviously this chivalry here is inferring to Jerry wanting to help his mother. Jerry being a very nice, compassionate boy wanting to help his mother. So we've kind of gone through how we might infer what both of those words mean, right? Context clues. But how might we dig deeper? How might we use what we've just figured out to connect to the information that came before it and or the rest of the passage, right? So how to dig deeper with a difficult word? Well, let's look at these principles. Can you connect the word or phrase to information that came before it, to what you know and what you've learned from the preview? What is the preview? Well, I like to associate previews with background knowledge, right? Remember when I said before you read a passage, you should get to know what kind of society the author lived in. Of course, whatever society the author lived in, likely the story takes place in that society, right? So first, take a look at, what's happening, in that kind of, what are the customs, what are the norms in that period of time. So that's a lot of background knowledge. Remember when I said Doris Lessing was a British author? So that's kind of the preview, right? Why do you think the writer uses this particular word or phrase? Contrition and chivalry are both words that we don't use very much in the modern day, right? But we have to remember that she lived in, England, probably tens or hundreds of years ago, right? So in England, of course, they use, harder words, more difficult words, but there are specific, connotations, specific feelings that these words are supposed to bring to readers. So that relates us to the next question. How does this word or phrase relate to the tone, mood, or theme of the text? So what kind of mood, what kind of feeling is the author trying to give you as a reader when you're reading a sentence containing those words? What is the connection between this word or phrase and others within the text? So do they have the same feeling as other words within the text? Do they strictly mean the same thing? Are they trying to, is the author trying to combine them with other words just to give us a specific feeling? What kinds of things is the author trying to convey other than just what's happening? What is the significance of this word or phrase in relation to other ideas in the sentence or paragraph? So how does this word support what you've read in other sentences? How does this word support even the title, right? Excuse me. So let's use these 5 points right here to dig a bit deeper in this sentence. Remember in section 1.1 where I said, this boy was growing up, right? But this boy doesn't have the usual childhood. A lot of teenage boys, or young boys rather, have a lot of rebellion, right, during teenage years. But he is a chivalrous boy that is showing contrition for leaving his mother. So that shows us a lot of stuff about the boy, which is kind of a good character traits kind of inference. But what else does that show us? Well, that shows us that the boy is not fully grown up yet, right? And he lives with a single mother, so he feels probably guilty for leaving that mother, but that kind of feeds into the theme of the whole passage. The theme is the boy growing up, right? And later on in this packet of close reading guidelines, we're going to get to some of the themes. But growing up is one of, the most obvious themes in this. So what does showing contrition and chivalry kind of show about the boy at first? Well, it shows that he is stuck to his mother. He hasn't grown up yet. So this is kind of the author showing us kind of a before and after transformation of the story and the boy, right? What kind of boy is he before, the through the tunnel actual plot happens? And then what kind of boy does he become afterward? So, of course, this contrition and chivalry kind of give us a sense of cautiousness. The boy is, cautiously, of course, trying to protect even his mother. But after the story, he becomes more grown up. He becomes, of course, he faces more challenges, so he gets to learn more stuff. So that's kind of looking deeper, of course, into the passage. So let's move on to difficult sentences, paragraphs, or sections. So maybe, a whole paragraph or a whole even 2 or 3 paragraphs that you just read through the first time and you completely don't understand. You can, of course, circle that section. You can, highlight it. You can kind of set that apart so that you can think about it before you read it the second time. So read each sentence word by word, chunking phrases, and making sure you know what each one means. If a particular word gives you trouble, use the strategies above to figure that out. You cannot figure out what a sentence, paragraph, or section means if you do not know what every word means inside of it, right? Because the words put together are going to mean something bigger. And if you don't know what each individual word means, you cannot, find that something bigger there. So paraphrase each sentence by saying it in your own words. What is paraphrasing? Well, that's a really good annotation strategy, right? Paraphrasing is rather important because it's part of annotating, in my opinion. So when you're going through and annotating a text, if you find something that's extremely hard and you read it the second time through, you should, figure out that annotating the second time through, you should, start making comments. Like find, a thinner pen that you might not be highlighting with and, go to the side of the passage and, if you have a sentence that you don't know what it means, close read it and then write a summary of it. Write something that you will know what it means. And maybe every time you read past that sentence, read your little paraphrase. And of course, continue rereading and paraphrasing each sentence, right? So you want to know what the author means from each specific sentence. You want to know what the author's trying to convey. So if you paraphrase each sentence, try to find the words that have feelings most similar to the feeling you get when reading that sentence. Even if you don't know exactly what every word means, figure those words out and then write that sentence in different words that you'll be able to understand right off the bat. If you can't retell several details, then reread the paragraph. Sometimes we get that feeling that we just read through a paragraph and we don't really know what we just read. And, everyone gets that feeling. I get that feeling, of course. And when we get that feeling, it's really easy to just say, oh, forget it, I'm going to go on to the next paragraph. But that's not a good way to read closely. So rereading and retelling paragraphs is very, very important, because if you cannot find several details that you gleaned from reading it, you just read it for no reason. And you're not going to be able to understand it in the grand scheme of things. So reread it and, try to summarize it, paraphrase it again. Continue, and in section 1.3, we're going to cover summarizing and paraphrasing too. Continue rereading and retelling paragraphs. When you get to the end of a section, retell it for yourself, right? If you can retell it for yourself, and of course, if you're in class and you can retell it for somebody else, your friends or your teacher, then you've really gotten it, right? You've really understood it, and then you can use that specific part. If you are able to reread it and retell it, you can use that specific part as evidence in an analytical essay. It'll be easier for you to read that, or to use that, in an essay. If you don't really understand a section, it's easier to misquote or, not really understand the author's purpose, and then in your essay, it won't be as strong as something you understand and you can write extensively about. So, how might we dig deeper in a difficult sentence, paragraph, or section? Well, you consider the themes of the text. How does the sentence, paragraph, or section relate to the themes? Themes like, of course, the obvious one, growing up, and themes like competition between the boy and his mother, or the boy and the other boys, right? What other themes are there? Well, you can think about it yourself, and in the midst of annotation, you can kind of find what you yourself got from the short story, right? What you think the author was trying to tell you, what stood out to you as a theme. How does the sentence, paragraph, or section relate to them? Well, if it relates well to the theme, you, of course, in your essay can use that as a supporting quote for your theme. Why did the writer include this sentence, paragraph, or section in the text? So what was the author thinking when they were writing this? Because, in short stories that Miss Joyner or other teachers give you while you're learning writing are going to be very good text, right? And of course we said that assume every word or phrase carries meaning. So what meaning is the author trying to tell you? Because it's obviously carrying meaning. So the author is most likely trying to, if you don't understand something, the author is most likely trying to tell you something deeper than you thought about at first hand, right? Because it's not something they just put in there just for the sake of putting it in there. So definitely think about what the author is trying to convey, because that might be something that's important to the rest of the text. How does a sentence, paragraph, or section connect to the title? And of course, Through the Tunnel has a very, very interesting title, right? Because it's not only telling you what happens, obviously he's going through a tunnel, but it's also telling you, maybe that tunnel is symbolizing growing up. Maybe that tunnel is symbolizing his, teenage years, and he's going through that independence tunnel. And when he emerges at the other end, he is a grown-up person. He understands more stuff, and he becomes a more mature person. Maybe that's what the title means. I don't know. Think about it yourself. But you first need to understand the title. The title is something that's very, very important in an advanced text, right? Because if you don't know what the title means, it's going to be very hard to understand what the author means in the grand scheme of things. Because Through the Tunnel is obviously, what he's doing in the plot. But if you do not understand its deeper meaning, you're never going to understand the theme. How does a sentence, paragraph, or section connect to other parts of the text? Well, that goes back to the theme, right? Does this sentence, paragraph, or section support the same theme as other sentences, paragraphs, or sections? And do they give off the same feeling? Do they have the same connotation as other sentences, paragraphs, or sections? So those are questions you can ask yourself. What inferences can you make from this sentence, paragraph, or section? What is the author, trying to, what information is the author trying to give to you that he doesn't know, that he or she doesn't necessarily explicitly tell you? What is he or she trying to, push to you in a deeper way without just telling you right off the bat? So let's find a sentence, paragraph, or section. I didn't necessarily underline one, but let's find one that that is harder. Well, let's look at this right here. It's a short paragraph, but we get the struggle. The author writes in an interesting way, right? The author gives us a list of stuff he does without really a lot of transition words. He choked, sank, came up. The rock, lately weighted with boys, seemed to rear up out of the water as their weight was removed. They were flying past him now, into the water. The air was full of falling bodies. Then the rock was empty in the hot sunlight. He started counting. So counting is also kind of a central idea throughout the tunnel, right? Because when he's swimming through the tunnel and the climax, he kind of, he counts as well, right? Counting is kind of, his hope, I don't know how to describe it, just kind of, what he hangs on when he's struggling. So this is a really difficult, kind of section right here, but we can see that they were flying down past him into the water, and then the rock was empty. So that kind of shows us loneliness, and you see a lot of loneliness throughout this passage, right? You see him, he's going away from his mother. His mother used to be the person that was around him all the time, but now he's, slowly, distancing himself from his mother. So he's lonely, and, there's kind of a central idea of loneliness throughout this. But also, the boys are acting as kind of, a motivation to him, but then when they're removed, it's kind of like, a weight on him is removed. It says right here their weight was removed. Not just he's perceiving, the rock's gone up a little bit. That's of course the central. That's of course, the hard meaning of that little part. But when you're looking at that, you might think, well, there's a theme of competition in my opinion. So what kind of competition is he having? Well, he's having a competition of, you saw his hot shame up here. He had competition between himself and the boys about getting through that tunnel. And of course, when it's quiet and there's no boys, he feels that a weight is removed. So that might be a deeper meaning of that little section right there. And it was empty in the hot sunlight. He's lonely, but also, that weight of competition is lifted off of him, right? He kind of feels freer without the boys there. That's just one kind of way to interpret that, but you don't have to interpret it exactly the same way I do. But I was just wanting to take you through kind of a way that you can infer stuff and that you can relate it to a bigger section there. So, inferences. Remember what we just made? We made inferences about what the author necessarily means, and we said it was about connotation, right? Connotation is kind of what feeling the word gives, not just denotation. Because denotation is definitely something that matters because you need to know what the author is trying to tell you in terms of plot and what's happening. But connotation is more important in a literary text because it's telling you the deeper meaning there. Okay, so let's take you through one more example because I think I covered it pretty well with the difficult words, but I found one more difficult word here, supplication. So then one smiled and waved. It was enough. In a minute he had swum in and was on the rocks beside them being the boys, and smiling with a desperate, nervous supplication. And of course, supplication is a really difficult word. We might not know exactly what it means the first time we read it. And I suggest, again, that you do not go directly to the dictionary. Because in the dictionary, supplication is, of course, I believe it means servitude. Like it means like I'm bowing down and I'm serving someone. That's not necessarily what it means here. What it means here is that he is trying to please the boys. Not necessarily to the nth degree of, bowing down and serving and just putting his life in their hands. No. That's not exactly what it means. It means more of a milder, admiration, or a milder, and trying to please them, of course, because they are the ones that make him feel belonged, right? And they make him feel like he belongs. So that's supplication. They shouted cheerful greetings, and he wanted to preserve that good feeling that he had when he was with them. They understood that he was a foreigner straight from his own beach, but he was scared of them, disagreeing with him, or he was scared of them no longer treating him as, one of their own. So that's a good, interpretation of what that word means. And in the context of it, we can also say, well, this means that he cares about what the boys say, right? He cares about, what they think, and he cares about even competing with them. He doesn't want to lose to them, right? And so that desperate, nervous supplication is kind of the feeling he gets the first time he, is put kind of into competition and into friendship with them. So that's kind of important there. So there's another example of how you can go through and find specific things that the author wants you to find other than what's happening at the moment. Now that we've covered that, let's briefly go over a few literary elements, right? These are things that you've probably, explored since you were in 6th grade or even before, right? These were words that you've seen many, many times before. But there are a few of these that are more, less common, that you might not have heard of, like denouement and, think a lot of times resolution's not explained very well, right? So let's look at a few of these. So obviously the protagonist is the main character of a story. That's pretty obvious. The antagonist are forces or characters. Doesn't matter. Forces, characters, settings, inner thoughts, anything that works against the protagonist. And it might be that the antagonist is not bad. So they don't have to be evil. You've heard that many times, I'm sure, from many teachers. They don't have to be evil, right? And in fact, sometimes the antagonist can even be good and the protagonist be bad, right? The protagonist can be the main character that's very evil, but, that's still the main character. And the antagonist can be the good, and, the good that's working against the main character. Anything like that, right? So you can see in the antagonist are the mother and the boys who swim through the tunnel. Now, the mother loves the child, and Jerry loves the mother. There's nothing evil about that, right? The mother is, a caring mother who, frankly knows a lot. She has a lot of wisdom, right? She doesn't want to overstep her duties as a mother. She also wants the child to grow up. So she has her own internal conflict, and she knows that the boy needs to grow up. So she's not evil, of course. But she sometimes works against Jerry. Like when I said, and she doesn't, explicitly tell Jerry, you can't go here and you can't go there. But she is kind of, an implied force that works against Jerry, right? She's kind of a force that, makes Jerry feel guilty for going away. So, stuff like that, right? She doesn't, explicitly work against, but you kind of have to infer that it's her that's discouraging Jerry from doing what he wants to do. And then you have the boys who swim through the tunnel. And they're not evil either, right? They were good at the beginning, but then they left Jerry, right? And they were part of this, the stuff that worked against what Jerry wanted to do. And, as much as they encouraged Jerry to go through the tunnel, Jerry would not have had such motivation if it weren't for those boys. So they don't have to be evil. They just have to be people that work against the main character. So then we have setting, of course, the beach, rocks and tunnel, the villa, where stuff is happening and when, during the summer, of course. Plot. The events in a story, what happens to the protagonist, makes up the plot. So the main parts of the plot are leaving Mom and the big beach to the rocks. So you can kind of see the setting influences the plot, because the big beach represents safety and his mother, whereas the rocks represents independence and danger. So with a change of setting, we see not only a change of plot, but also a change of, a theme there, a change of feelings. So training to have enough breath to go through the tunnel, and training is another major part of that, right? You see his encouragement, his steadfastness, right? He's gonna get there. And then the climax. Notice it says near the end. That's really important as well. I used to think the climax was in the middle, where the biggest stuff happens. But the climax doesn't necessarily have to be in the middle. The climax is, in fact, usually near the end. But I've seen stories that the climax is near the beginning, too. But usually it's near the end because they're building, that kind of... In good stories, it's near the end because they're building that, that feeling. And then near the end, they kind of let it go. They kind of resolve the story, right? So that you can, fall asleep at night and not be always thinking about what's happening next. So when Jerry makes it through the tunnel is, of course, the climax. And it resolves very quickly after that. But here's a new term that you might not have seen before. And this term is rather important, especially in this story. Because it's very clear where this happens. A denouement, or a denouement. I would say denouement. This is a new term. It's a return to normalcy. And oftentimes the author, outlines in the beginning of the story what is a normal, right? For this boy, it's really, really clear. Like every summer, he comes with his mother to the bay and he goes to the big beach and, there's a routine. And it says really clearly in the first page, there's a routine, right? He goes to the safe beach, he plays for a day, then he goes back to the villa, goes to sleep, and then goes to the safe beach again. And this happens for who knows how long during the summer, right? And then they go back home, right? That's kind of, the normal. And we can kind of treat even going home as a normal, right? But in this story, it's probably the most clear what happens, right? The denouement usually happens after the climax, right? Because Jerry makes it through the tunnel. He about dies, right? The climax of the story. Crazy, right? That's the point that you're excited for. And then the denouement happens. In this story, Jerry doesn't battle his mom about not swimming because he no longer needs to return to the bay. He has accomplished his goal. So a lot of times the denouement happens after the goal is accomplished, right? And this denouement, of course, is, not battling his mom. And, it says at the end his mother was ready for a fight, but he just says, okay, I'm going to go to sleep and I'm going to go home. It's a return to the normal life because he's accomplished his goal already. It's not really shown to us if he's going to keep pursuing that goal the next summer or another goal. But, at this point, we see his return to normal. And that's the denouement. Conflicts, tensions between characters or within a character. So we see they outline the conflict between Jerry and his mother. He wants to break away. She's trying not to be overprotective. But the tension still exists. But I want you to see if there's an internal conflict. Think about this yourself. You can pause this video and think about this yourself for a little while. But internal conflicts, what kind of internal conflicts does Jerry have? Well, he's saying, I'm going to get through that tunnel. But then he has an internal conflict, that I think that either 1 or 2 days before he leaves. He's like, oh, I can give up. I'll just do it next summer. Do you remember that in the story? He says, oh, I'll just give up. I'll do it next summer. But then the other side, the steadfast side of him says, well, if you wait until next summer, you're never going to do it. And then he kind of thinks about it. He battles for a while within himself. So that's an internal conflict. And that's probably the most obvious internal conflict in this story. But usually internal conflicts show more about the character than external conflicts do. So you always want to be on the lookout for those internal conflicts that aren't as obvious as the external ones. Problems. Of course, challenges that the protagonist faces, not necessarily a conflict between himself or another character, but just problems. Him versus the tunnel. He wants to successfully swim through the tunnel. Now the resolution. I have something to say about the resolution, and this is similar to the denouement, but you really want to differentiate between the resolution and the denouement. I want you to look for the main benefit of the story. Look for the benefit due to the denouement, right? I always forget how to spell denouement, but yeah. So look for the benefit due to the denouement. Because the resolution is going to, make our hearts a bit steady, right? It's going to, calm us down after the climax. But, of course, the denouement is the plot part of the resolution, right? It's the return to normal life. It's, of course, the plot part, what happens to resolve the story. But the resolution, I want you to look for what the author is trying to tell you. What has Derry gained from this story? What is the, outcome? What is the, the end result of everything that happened? Themes. So there are ideas from a story that can be generalized to apply outside the story. So one of the themes that isn't so obvious is obviously competition, right? It's not so obvious. Competition with self and competition with the boys, right? Stuff that's not so obvious to us in the first reading. The most obvious is, of course, the separating from mom, right? The growing up. Central idea. I like this especially, the central idea they give right here. This is really good. This is a really good summary, right? If you were to write this central idea right here for your essay, you would write a very good essay because it's very meaningful. And so the theme that's threaded through the entire piece, it says a central idea in this story is that growing up and separating from parents can be emotionally and physically painful, but it is rewarding in the end. And that's the important part, because it is rewarding in the end, right? So that's what, the author's trying to teach us. And if you write an essay with a good theme and a good central idea, then that essay is fundamentally going to be good. Whether you support it well or not is another story, but it's fundamentally going to be, it's going to be good, because if you have something meaningful to write about, your essay is always better than writing about something that's not meaningful. Okay, our final thing we're going to do today is about building prior knowledge. And this is a smaller section of this, of close reading, but that doesn't mean it's not important. So there are a few things I want to go through here. I'm not going to go through this whole page because, I don't want this video to be way too long for you, but read the title is the first thing you do when you read a story. What do I know about this topic? So one question you can ask yourself is, have you ever gone through a seemingly impossible tunnel in your life? Right? Have you gone through, something that you thought you would not get through? What does it feel like? And obviously you won't know about the theme of getting through stuff if you haven't read it once. So maybe ask yourself this question after you've read the passage the first time. So what did it feel like? If you know little to nothing, read slowly and thoughtfully. Be prepared to read parts again. If you know something about the topic, take the time to compare between what you read and what you know. Okay? Read the first paragraph if it is long. If it is short, read the first 2 paragraphs. So, kind of get, a background. Kind of read the first 2 paragraphs, then look at the title again and see if, anything changes about what the title means to you. That's a good thing to do. I'm going to skip a few of these because we're talking about a short story. Don't read the end. And even like in a longer novel, I recommend you don't read the end, because it's better to, keep yourself in suspense, because as much as we're reading this in a literary sense and we're going to write an essay about it, it's still not extremely good to, ruin the story for yourself, right? And the author, of course, put the end at the end because, they want you to read it last. Read any questions or discussion prompts that follow the text. So if you have any questions or discussion prompts that Ms. Joyner posts for a certain text, or if your teacher posts for a certain text, definitely read those. And then, summarize stuff to your partner and or yourself when you're working alone. So summarizing it is, of course, it has the same effect as, paraphrasing something, because it shows that you really understand what the text is about. And I'll do another video about summarizing soon. So, set a purpose for reading. I don't necessarily like the notebook, but if it helps you, jot down, notes about this. And then you can also jot down paraphrases or summaries about maybe a sentence, or summaries about a whole section. You can jot that down in your notebook here. Set a purpose for reading. This is not as important, but if you're a person that gets distracted or If you're a person that doesn't like reading a lot, maybe set a purpose for reading. Like, it's my goal that I am going to get through this and I'm going to understand it. Like, and I'm going to write a good essay for my teacher, stuff like that, right? So it's better for me as a personal reader if I don't necessarily set a purpose. If I just enjoy the text and then find certain central ideas, themes, and then finally, when I need to write my essay, then focus on, finding stuff that I want to write about. Because to me, enjoying a story first is a really good. It's a pleasure to enjoy the story first, and then, of course, and then finding what you're going to write about. Because I find that if you enjoy a story, then you're the reader of what the essay you've written enjoys that story better as well. So, yeah. That was all the curriculum I was going to cover today about close reading guidelines. I hope you all learned quite a bit today about close reading, and I think close reading is especially important when you're writing analytical essays. And we'll cover how you can use the guidelines we covered today to write a better analytical essay in the future. So stay tuned and watch the next video. Okay. I hope you all are doing well, and if you have any questions, email Miss Joyner or myself, and our contact is, of course, on the webpage. So, okay, see you all later. Thank you.